Thank you very much, Mohammed. And now we will have Mr. Shalash, and she's going to talk about the topic that is of ever great interest, the examination system in the education, history and studying STEM school alternative.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's a very long title, so I will not read it once again. But basically, I studied the Sanawiyya Amma examination, or secondary school leaving certification in Egypt, and looked at the STEM schools, the science, technology, engineering, and math schools in Egypt, as an alternative model for assessment because they do something very different. So, when I joined the MA program a few years ago, I gravitated almost immediately towards the development and policy track. And I then asked myself the question, how can I research within that framework, and what could be reformed in Egypt from a policy perspective? And I chose the examination and assessment more generally, because I actually have never gone through the Sanawiyya Amma certification, many of you may have, but the research shows that this kind of examination actually tests more of what you can memorize and what information you can regurgitate, rather than the higher order thinking skills like analysis and critical thinking that are very important in today's world. So, the Sanawiyya Amma examination is an example of a high-stakes test. And it's high stakes because there's a lot at stake for the student taking this test. There's a lot at stake in the schooling, for their family paying lots of money for private tutoring so that they do very well. And there's a lot at stake because it can track you at a very early age into either vocational schooling, like Rehan was explaining, that has a very low stigma in society still, or into the general secondary track, which leads to university, requiring higher grades, which obviously has a higher position in society. So it can track you. It also takes a huge financial burden from the family through private tutoring. And it also can eventually lead into what faculty you can study in and what kind of job you can get, which then will lead to what kind of income you can get. So it has huge implications for someone's life, just a score on a certification from high school, you're taking when you're starting at 17 or 16 here. So it's a very young age. So, like I said, the Sanawiyya Amma examination is high stakes, and it is testing the skills that are not necessarily meeting the labor market today. So the labor market today requires the kind of skills that are actually more like 21st century skills, like collaborating, teamwork, communication, creativity, and determination, being able to learn on your own, come up with your own projects, analyze information, so take the data and actually do something a step forward with it. So the MENA region actually has a serious problem, the Middle East, North Africa region, because the highest levels of unemployment are actually among the educated. So millions of students are going through an education system, being assessed on this knowledge that they're receiving, but are not actually graduating with the skills that the labor market needs from them. So these 21st century skills are lacking in general in the public school system in Egypt. But they do happen to exist in one model of education in Egypt, which is new, which is the STEM schools. And the STEM schools were established in Egypt in 2011 as part of a USAID Ministry of Education partnership. And this is bringing an interdisciplinary, which is the STEM, all of those subjects together, and project-based learning. So students actually looking at data through problems, trying to solve them in projects, in group work. So this is actually incorporating all of those 21st century skills of collaborating with other people, at looking at real-life problems, and analyzing data. So my research specifically wants to give you a little bit of context behind this. So why is the Sanawiyya Amma examination, if most research is showing that it does not actually prepare students well, why do we still have it? So I wanted to give you a little bit of historical context around why it still exists as the main indicator for academic success in Egypt, and then evaluate this alternative model of assessment used in the STEM schools. So because the STEM schools use a Capstone projects, or problem-based learning around projects, they actually assess in that way. So the Capstone project is actually worth 60% of the grade for the first 3 years of their school. 30% then comes from other examinations, and then 10% from class participation. In the final year, which I'll discuss, the weights change a little bit, giving more weight to the examination. But the kids are mostly assessed on how they're dealing with projects. So my specific goals, my specific question were, how does the STEM model deliver on its stated goals? If it wants to allow students to have higher order thinking skills, collaborate with others, use the internet and digital world to achieve that, how well is it actually doing? And then also, can it offer an effective model? Is this replicable in Egypt? Can we introduce some of these aspects of the STEM school into the public system? So, for the history, I'll give you a little bit of the global context. So the high-stakes testing is actually a global phenomenon. It's not just Egypt. It began in the Western world, actually all over the world, at the Cold War. Why? Because countries, for the first time, kept wanting to compare themselves. And they needed data to be able to compare themselves. How well are we performing, in the USSR versus the US? And so they started collecting data on standardized examinations. And this data led to a lot of importance given to data as an objective marker for success. So this supposedly makes it completely objective screening. Doesn't matter where you come from, doesn't matter how much money your parents have. If you perform well in an exam that everybody else is taking, then it's supposedly a fair chance. But I think we all know that there are a lot of other hidden aspects to this that don't make it an actual fair choice. Within Egypt's context, I separated it into kind of the main regimes in Egypt's history. So from 1952 to 1970, this is following the 1952 revolution and the rise of Nasser in a socialist government. And at this time, Nasser wanted to expand education. So let's go away from the elitism pre-revolution and offer everybody a chance. And he introduced Sanawiyya Amma certification as this objective, standardized way of screening graduates. And at that time, not only that, he went a step forward and offered everybody, guaranteed everybody a job as long as they graduated through this system. In 1970, with the rise of Sadat, there was a lot of unemployment because you can't possibly give every single person a job, even if you want to. So you have mass unemployment and a shift completely away from the socialist regime into the open door policy of privatization. At this time, private schools were open all over the country as well, and that trend is growing. And not everybody was then required to take the examination. If you're in a private school, you have more money, and you can afford to go to a more elite institution, you don't actually have to take that examination to graduate. And you're more likely to get a job with a private company. Fast forward to 1981, you have President Mubarak, and again, the economic crisis, the oil boom in Egypt, an economic crisis at the time, and they started shifting and saying, we have to focus on the vocational TVET education because our students really are not finding jobs. They don't have the right skills for the workforce. So this, 1981, 1990s, is kind of the shift. We need to start focusing on the skills people need to be employed. Keep fast forwarding to 2011, you have a huge revolution again, with people on the street saying the same things. We still can't find jobs. We still don't have the skills we need to be employable, and we want to change. But until now, nothing has really changed. So the STEM model is a bit different. The goals of the STEM schools I separate into two levels. The first is the individual level. At the student level, the goal is stated by the two pilot schools, the 6th of October School for boys and the Maidi School for girls. At the individual level is to teach a student how to self-learn, be an independent learner, find information on their own, analyze information on their own, and then take it a step further and work with groups to synthesize this information, and then apply this information to projects. At the national level, the goal of the STEM school is to supposedly build a cadre of young scientists, the future of Egypt, to deal with the challenges facing the country, environmental challenges, political challenges, and so on. So my study is actually evaluating those two things. I'm offering an historical perspective, but then also looking at the STEM model to see how well they kind of meet those two goals at the individual level and at the national level. So I conducted semi-structured interviews with 7 students. And these students are graduates of the first 2 STEM schools. I could only have 1 girl, unfortunately. 1 girl is a graduate from the Maidi School for Girls, and 5 graduates from the 6th of October School for Boys, and 1 student who went to the boys' school but then dropped out after the first year. So I used open-ended questions for these interviews because I didn't want to use any of my own bias. So these were very open. It became a very big discussion, and I directed them with my questions, but they were really able to share what they wanted. I then did a thematic content analysis. So I transcribed all of those interviews, looked for codes, so repeated phrases, ideas, and tried to group them together to see what were the most common ideas that came out of these discussions. My sample was purposive. I wanted to talk to people who have actually gone through the whole system, or dropped out for reasons I'll tell you, gone through the system, and then actually gone through the university admission process. So I want to see that step beyond high school. These students are ages 18 to 20, and they all went on to American universities, which was also purposive in my study. I wanted to see the students who went through this system and then were admitted into elite American institutions. So most of them went to ABC. 2 of the students I did Skype interviews with. They actually live abroad and go to American universities abroad. They're all in the sciences. They stayed within the science track at the STEM school, and they're actually from 5 different governors around. Limitations with that, again, I only had 1 female. I would have liked to talk to more because the 2 schools are actually very different in facilities and teaching. So my findings. I put just a couple of things here. There are a lot more in the actual paper, but these I think kind of sum up some of the good things that came out of the discussion. The first one is it got us ready for how the world is today. And across all of the interviews, the participants kept telling me, we really learned independence at a very young age. And we learned how to work with others. And we learned how to find information and come to class and teach it to others. And they had never had that experience. These are kids who all come from public preparatory schools, who are all gifted in the sciences. And gifted because they performed well on a standardized examination. So we can use that as a limitation. But they all went in and learned the skills that we would consider 21st century skills. And they've now taken those skills onto university and say that they perform much better at university now because they have those skills. Second one, the Capstone project was more meaningful than the exam. All of the students, though there were some issues with the Capstone project, all of them told me it was meaningful in and of itself. It doesn't matter how you grade it, it doesn't matter what they did with the project afterwards. This was all really fun. It gave us laughter, it gave us time to work with each other. These are also residential schools, they're boarding schools. So the students spent a lot of time together. And they say this is where they built friendships, this is where they tried things, they would experiment, they would build things in their rooms, and it was really meaningful to them because they got nothing out of the actual exams. They said, take the exam, we crammed for 2 days beforehand, and then nothing happens to it. But the project, we really felt like we did something. Third one, we learned better than Sanawiyah Amma. Granted, these students had not gone through Sanawiyah Amma, but they all said, we didn't have the stress that goes along with that. We didn't have to worry like our other friends who stayed in regular preparatory schools. We didn't have to worry about all the money that went into private tutoring and all the stress that came along with studying. They had fun. The last one, we needed a grading system. So, in general, none of the students had anything positive to say about the assessment part of this. They said, honestly, the Capstone project didn't assess our learning from class at all. So what we took in class in terms of subject matter didn't really translate into these projects. The projects we were kind of left alone to do on our own. We found information, it was a lot of fun, we learned a lot through the process, but it wasn't a great assessment of the content we were learning. It was a good assessment of their learning and development as humans, but it wasn't a great assessment of the learning in classroom. They also complained that the exams they actually took on the content were not consistent across teachers, that they were never given proper material to prepare for them, and that very last minute they would change decisions, and none of the students felt confident that the examinations they were taking were assessing their learning first of all, and that they were prepared for them. So, limitations. in my historical research, I go up until about the revolution. I haven't been looking at the newest STEM schools that have opened post-revolution, sorry, post-2011, and I haven't been looking at anything more recent than that. Also, it's limited to students. I really wanted to interview teachers and administrators to see how, teaching to do a capstone project versus an exam. So you're not teaching to the test anymore, you're teaching to a project, how that really makes a difference in class. I think that's really important to look at. And for administrators to see, how does it change their relationship with teachers if they have more voice in class and whatnot. Further research, I think it's really important to continue to incorporate student voices into the evaluation of the STEM schools. Because I asked each student if they had ever been contacted from the schools after they graduated, and they said no. And a couple of them are actually trying to create their own alumni association on their own and not getting much support from the school. And they all said, yeah, we left, we've been gone now for 2 years, and no one's contacted us, no one has asked about us. And I think it's really important, because they are actually replicating these STEM schools all around Egypt as we speak, that they look at the first cohort and ask them, what was this experience like? And how can we use some of your experience as we recreate these schools, and how we can incorporate it maybe into the general, larger educational system in Egypt. So, I want to say thank you to everybody. The whole GSE. Salma and Dina, thank you so much. You're very helpful, especially in the last couple of weeks. To my reader, Heba, thank you. You made this happen. And to my advisor, Jennifer Skaggs, who could not be here today. Also, thank you to my lovely friends, you included, for the moral support. It took a long time, but we got here, and I'd like to thank you all. So.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. And it was really nice to have the information coming from the field about STEM schools. And we have the principal of the October 6th STEM school is one of our students. He's just finishing. And the principal of the Ismailia